Will Flanders is standing by to talk about the great burn that Tony Evers delivered to those awful Republicans, of course, on the backs of Wisconsin taxpayers. Good to have you, Will, from Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty.
Hey, good afternoon. Yeah, with that quote from Kamala Harris there, it reminded me of the college essays that kids would write the night before when I was back in school. Just word salad, just stretch it out.
Yes. I used to occasionally run into those as well when I was a TA for Sociology 100 at the University of Denver. And I recall flunking a couple of kids, and they did not appreciate it. You know, handwritten. That was back when you could turn in handwritten college papers.
And now you just get GPT to do it for you. So.
Handwritten college papers in the worst handwriting because, unlike Kamala, they didn't get up in the morning and get high. They went to bed after getting high, and that's when they wrote their papers. And so that's when I got to read them. All right, Will Flanders. Really, it's kind of bizarre to see the way the press is presenting this. If people roll back time to Scott Walker being governor, and Scott Walker had pulled a stunt like this, expanding ever increasing education dollars in perpetuity, I mean, the press would have lit their hair on fire, and there would have been nothing but editorials denouncing Walker for his action. But it's not like that. It's as if this was a one-up in a game of political brinksmanship that the Republicans lost, even though we, the taxpayers, are the ones who are on the hook for this. And so what are we talking about here in terms of real money?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's just crazy to see the way the media is presenting this as if Evers is some brilliant political genius, when what he's really done is set up Wisconsin taxpayers for 400 years, and that's not an exaggeration. For anyone who hasn't heard this yet, though I assume most folks have, it's 400 years of tax increases. So we did a little analysis when this first came out yesterday, and it sounds innocuous at first, $325 a year, but that $325 gets locked in place, and then the next year we add $325 more dollars. So we're $650 in year 2. We're $975 in year 3. By 20 years from now, we're up to $3,700 per student. And over the next 20 years, we're talking about $57 billion in new costs to Wisconsin taxpayers because of this partial veto.
$57 billion more dollars. Okay. Any amount of this money tied to taking 35% proficiency in reading and math on average across the board in Wisconsin to 100%. Because maybe $57 billion might be worth the cost if, in fact, we had 100% proficiency in reading and math, or close. Anything? Any strings attached?
These are no strings attached additional funds, just like the governor has been wont to do in the past, going back to his time as DPI superintendent. He thinks that throwing more money at public schools will miraculously solve the issues that we have. And instead, as we've spent more money over the last few years, what we've seen is proficiency has gone down. We had schools that stayed closed for a year and a half after COVID, and those kids are likely never going to catch up. And we're essentially rewarding these schools with additional funding for the next 400 years, which is a weird thing to say, but for the next 400 years, with no strings attached for improvement, no requirements for higher proficiency or reading outcomes.
We've had record education spending, Will, somewhere around $5 billion just in the last handful of years, and we've seen proficiency go down, as you say. So with the additional dollars, we have kids coming out of Wisconsin schools dumber. Now, I mean, I don't mean to trash the kids. That is an absolute condemnation of the quality of education versus the money poured into education. Why is that? Why is the amount of money inversely related to proficiency in school?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, but it's a finding that repeats itself across the country, that more money doesn't make a difference. And if you look at what other countries spend on education, many times they spend far less than the United States does, and yet they get much better outcomes in subjects like reading and math across the board. So what we spend instead on are layers upon layers of bureaucracy. Let's see how much of this money actually goes to the classroom. I guarantee you the vast majority of it will go to new administrative positions, new DEI positions. These are the things that school districts like to spend on, rather than things that directly affect students in the classroom and will improve outcomes.
Okay, what if it did go to the classroom? Let's just pretend for a second that it went to the classroom. Is there evidence that would improve reading and math scores in Wisconsin. I don't think there's any evidence that even if it is not poured into wasted administrative mush, which will produce more pieces of genius like our great vice president just delivered to us about culture, but I don't see any evidence that even if you did that, unless you hired individual tutors to catch kids up, maybe, that we would actually see any kind of improvement. What would be spent in the classroom? I mean, if you're talking about 325, what is the average classroom, Will? I should have asked this before.
About 18 students per classroom.
Okay, 18. So if you had an extra $6,000 per classroom per year, how would that improve things? That's the first year, $6,000, and then another $6,000. So you had $12,000 the next year, and you had $18,000 the next year per classroom. What are they saying? This is just money being thrown at a system that has no accountability at all.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the answer is if you did go to $6,000 per year, I guarantee you that the school districts would be just right back there next year asking for even more. I think the first question to ask these folks is what number would actually make you satisfied?
Yes.
And they can never provide you an answer to that question because there is no answer. More is what we need always and forever. So the answer, in terms of if we laser focus on certain programs, we see improvement. I think in general, the answer is no to that question. As you said, a really targeted thing focused on tutoring or things like that to catch kids up that are behind. There might be some small amount of evidence that could help, but there's no reason to think that's what school districts are going to do with this funding.
And I mentioned this yesterday. When you have a school district like Milwaukee that has sub 10%, I mean, we're talking just kids who are breathing in and out, not learning a damn thing. When you have what's $325 more per student going to do in a school district that is consistently not cared about sub 10% proficiency?
Yeah, absolutely nothing. And again, they're being rewarded for continued failure with more funding. We always like to say about the school choice program, if parents think a school isn't doing a good job, they'll move on, they'll leave the school, and maybe the school will shut down. And while that's temporarily problematic, it's better to get those schools out of the system. What happens in the public school system is they continue forever in perpetuity and are eventually rewarded with more funding if they complain long enough.
Yeah, and so we have actually had an interesting untold story of kids leaving or fewer kids entering, I should say. Maybe it's not kids leaving the public school system. We're educating fewer kids, and it's costing more money. And so every time there's fewer kids, it seems like the districts can't figure out how to educate them with the amount of money that they have available, even though there are fewer kids, which strongly argues against any of this money being directed toward actual education.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But pre-COVID, we were at about 860,000 kids across the state in the school system. Now we're down to about 810,000. So we've lost nearly 40,000 students since COVID. Those are families that are homeschooling. Those are families that are using the school choice program, maybe using some charter schools. But yeah, enrollment is way down, and yet we're spending more than ever. And the question has to be asked, even if you need more money per student, well, guess what? You're getting that if we keep funding flat at this point, and yet you're still demanding more and more.
How come that's never a calculation? Maybe that's what we need, is a calculation with the dwindling number of kids in schools than the actual, aid per student is X. So every single new budget biennium that rolls around, you can say the left will always complain that there's been cuts. When there hasn't been cuts, actually, the math says it's an increase.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's something we should do. We'll put that together
right.
for and get that out, because I think that'd be a useful statistic to have for sure.
Yeah, well, I don't know. People are saying, well, it's okay, we'll sue. Robin Voss was saying, we're going to sue. We have a different Supreme Court than we had in the past. So good luck to us as Wisconsin taxpayers, because we are going to need it to get ourselves unburied from this. By the way, one last thing. What happens if we don't have the ability to pay the mandated 400-year massive increase in property tax or otherwise tax contributions to the school system?
Yeah, so this money is through the revenue limit, and either the state or property taxpayers have to pay. So if the state doesn't think they can fund this, then get ready to see your property taxes shoot through the roof.
It would be
time.
mandated.
So somewhere this money has to come from.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's mandated by law. If, in fact, the Wisconsin Supreme Court doesn't throw it out. It would be in the law. And so just saying, well, that's just crazy, we can't afford to pay it, isn't going to be good enough to argue against it. Thank you so much, Will.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
You as well. Will Flanders, Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty.